great to have you here for another TSE single slider. This one's all about the XY problem, which is the false assumption that X can best be accomplished by doing Y. The XY problem can cause a lot of grief for people who are asking and answering questions, especially technical questions. The good news is that you're about to learn how to both recognize and avoid the XY problem, which will help you both ask and answer questions more effectively. To explain the XY problem, we're going to start with a user who wants to set up Stripe subscriptions on their website. Note that this user is not a developer. We're going to look at a timeline, with the first event on the timeline being the user finding a guide to implementing Stripe subscriptions with code. The user, upon finding this guide, thinks to themselves that if they can just get the code in the guide working, they can accomplish their goal. These are the two components of the XY problem. X is the actual goal the user has. Y is the thing they believe they need to do to accomplish their goal. The user doesn't know much, if anything, about X or Y, so the assumption that Y is the best path to X is unlikely to be correct. But let's see what happens. We're going to fork the timeline and take a look at what happens when the user focuses on their assumed solution. As the user, who again is not a developer, tries to follow the guide, they quickly run into issues, so they start asking us questions. The first question they have is about modifying the code they found to add a one-time fee. That's a reasonable question in isolation, but it's far from the only question they have. Next, they ask about collecting addresses with the code. Then they ask if the code will work with their web host. Many other questions follow. Note that all of these questions are focused on their assumed solution, getting the code working, not their actual goal of adding Stripe subscriptions to their website. Because the real goal isn't mentioned, we take these questions at face value and answer them one at a time over a long period of time. On this timeline, the user might eventually assemble a working subscriptions integration, but they'll have spent a lot of their own time and effort to create something they don't really understand, which is likely of questionable quality and is unlikely to serve them well in the long term. They've also used up quite a bit of Stripe's time getting all these questions answered. Losing sight of the true goal in favor of an assumed solution leads to the wrong questions and wasted time. However, there is another path. Let's look at another timeline, where the user's focus stays on their actual goal. In this timeline, the user starts with a different question, one that has a clearly stated goal in relevant context. Now we know their real goal, the fact that they're not a developer, and we can see that trying to write code is probably not the best path forward for them. We suggest payment links instead, a no-code option that supports subscriptions, and ask them if that will work for their use case. This is a much better solution for this specific user, and in this timeline, it's appropriate for us to suggest payment links because the user has revealed their true goal. After the user does a little research, they confirm payment links are a perfect solution for their needs, and their questions and confusion come to an end. This user had the exact same goal in both timelines, but where they chose to focus their attention made a world of difference. When they focused on a solution they assumed would work, they ended up wasting a ton of time and resources and probably either abandoned the project in frustration or ended up with a subpar solution. In the other timeline, the good timeline, they focused on their real goal and were able to get a working solution up and running very quickly. The solution they ended up with in the second timeline was actually a better fit for their needs and experience, despite requiring significantly less time and effort. Now that you understand what the XY problem is, let me tell you how to avoid it. If you're asking a question, make sure you stay focused on your goal, not a specific solution you assume to be the best or that you think will work. Always include relevant context so the person who's helping you can give you the best answer possible. If you're answering questions, make sure you know what the real goal actually is. Does the ideal outcome depend on the answer to a specific technical question, or would a different approach altogether be best? Sometimes the answer is the former, and sometimes it's the latter, but you won't know for sure unless you understand the true goal. One way to determine the real goal is to ask why until the answer stops changing. Sometimes it takes a fair bit of detective work and patience to uncover the true goal, but doing so is almost always worth the effort for everyone involved. As I mentioned in the beginning, the XY problem happens all the time, and now you can see the harm it can cause. Note that this isn't a contrived or outlandish example. These kinds of questions and scenarios happen every day, and this example is based on several real interactions I've had with various users. Now that you understand the XY problem, you should be able to avoid it, which will lead to better outcomes for both questions you ask and questions you answer.